For the past couple of months, Ukraine has been attacking Russia's oil refineries, and this strategy has been strikingly successful. Using its newest drones and missiles, Ukraine has been able to hit refineries hundreds of kilometers inside of Russia, and enough of them to trigger a Russian fuel crisis, with shortages at petrol stations and ever-rising diesel prices, which has in turn threatened to push inflation back to dangerous levels within Russia. However, in the past month or so, while continuing to strike refineries, Ukraine has also widened its campaign to include another bit of Russia's infrastructure, its electricity grid. So in this video, we're going to take a look at Ukraine's recent strikes on Russia's electricity infrastructure, how Russia has reacted, and why it could pose a real problem to the Kremlin going forward. Never miss an episode and always feel in the loop by subscribing and ringing the bell. So let's get straight into it. Probably the first sign that we got of this new strategy came in late September, when Ukraine hit a thermal power station and an electrical substation in the Russian city of Belgorod, which lies just a few kilometers north of the Ukrainian border. These attacks were remarkably successful. They caused partial blackouts in the city and provoked a rare reaction from Putin himself, who about a week later complained to his defense ministry about Ukraine, quote, targeting civilian facilities inside our territory. And over the last month, we've seen a continuation of these strikes against electrical substations deep inside Russia. For context, substations are sort of the junctions of an electricity grid. They essentially connect different parts of the grid and transform high voltage electricity from power plants to low voltage electricity that can be used domestically. They also protect the overall grid by detecting and isolating faults and help balance supply and demand across the grid to avoid blackouts. The first substation to be hit was apparently one near the town of Arzamas, which was hit on October 14th. This was then followed by another strike on a substation near the town of Borysaglebsk on October 16th. Then a third strike hit another substation near the city of Vladimir on October 17th, and then there was a fourth strike on a substation near Veshkaima, which is about 900 kilometers away from the Russian-Ukrainian border, on October 18th. There was then a fifth explosion at a substation near Berezniki on October 19th, although it's not clear whether this was because of a Ukrainian attack or just a bog-standard electrical fault. Now, to be clear, this isn't a totally new strategy. Ukraine did strike some of Russia's electricity infrastructure in the early days of the war, but these tended to be isolated attacks on targets near the Ukrainian border, which were easily fixed and didn't have a sustained impact on Russia's electricity grid or civilians. This time, however, the strikes have been far more frequent, and they do seem to be coordinated to put pressure on Russia's grid in specific places. The first three strikes, for instance, all hit substations on power lines running to Moscow, leading some speculation that Ukraine was trying to force blackouts in the Russian capital. This newfound ability to strike targets inside Russia has been facilitated by both Ukraine's impressive domestic defense industry, which is now producing enough drones and long-range missiles to carry out constant strikes against targets hundreds of kilometers away, but also better intelligence. Over the weekend, for instance, the Financial Times reported that the US has been sharing more intelligence with Ukraine to help Ukraine conduct strikes on targets deep inside Russia, like oil refineries and substations. Trump apparently made the decision to increase intelligence sharing after a particularly friendly call with Zelensky way back in July, and there was even some hope earlier this month that Trump might give Ukraine long-range Tomahawk missiles that Zelensky has been asking for years. But this now looks unlikely, because last week Trump held another phone call with Putin where the Russian president apparently convinced him that supplying Tomahawks to Ukraine would amount to an unacceptable escalation. And on Friday, Trump and Zelensky reportedly had somewhat of a bust-up in the White House, where Trump told Zelensky that he should give up Donetsk and Luhansk oblasts or risk being destroyed by Putin. Nonetheless, even if Ukraine doesn't get its Tomahawks, they're nonetheless clearly able to strike targets inside Russia anyway. And if the strikes on Russia's electricity infrastructure continue, which is presumably the plan, then they could cause real disruption to Russia's electricity grid, which is already pretty rusty, because most of the relevant infrastructure was built in the Soviet era. At the very least, this campaign against Russia's electricity infrastructure will probably force Russia to redeploy its limited air defense systems to defend its electricity grid, in the same way that they've done for their oil refineries, and it could also push up domestic energy prices. This wouldn't usually be that much of a problem for Russia, which has some of the lowest domestic electricity prices in the world, but it does come at an inopportune time for the Kremlin. As you probably already know, thanks to a dramatic increase in defense-related spending and the ruble's post-invasion depreciation, inflation has been running hot in Russia for really the last 2 years, with year-on-year inflation rising from a low of 2.3% in April 2023 to over 7% throughout 2024, and then a new high of 10.3% in March of 2025. To bring inflation down, the Russian central bank hiked interest rates from 7.5% in 2023 to a high of 21% in late 2024. And while these super steep rate hikes succeeded in bringing down inflation, which has since fallen for 6 consecutive months to a recent low of 8% in September, they also dampened growth, and there were fears that the Russian economy was headed for a recession earlier this year. This is why the Russian central bank started cutting rates early this year, even though inflation was still running above 8%, more than double the central bank's target of 4%. They basically decided that in the short term, avoiding a recession was more important than bringing inflation down to target. Anyway, if disruption to both Russia's fuel and electricity push up prices again, then the central bank will be forced into an even more acute dilemma. Either they hike rates once again, which would bring down inflation but risk pushing the Russian economy into a recession, or they continue with their rate cutting, despite the evident inflationary risks. Now, as always, we should stress that disruption to Russia's energy supplies isn't going to bankrupt the Kremlin or bring down Putin. Nonetheless, these strikes on Russia's energy infrastructure are a way for Ukraine to inflict pain on the Kremlin and the Russian public, which will become harder to bear as we move into winter, both because that's when people use the most energy, but also because, given the pace of Russia's advance has already slowed to a crawl, the front lines will probably freeze in winter. If Ukraine can continue to put pressure on the Russian economy while simultaneously denying them any notable advances on the battlefield, it could create a real incentive for Putin to enter negotiations. Before you go, we've just announced our new coffee table book, Assembly Required, a 300-page book which highlights 27 of the world's most beautiful parliament buildings, from the classics like the British Parliament in Westminster, to the US Capitol or the Hungarian Parliament, to ones you might not expect, like New Zealand, Bhutan or Bangladesh. For each parliament, we don't just show beautiful photos of these actually incredible buildings, we also tell you the stories behind the buildings, both through passages written by our team, as well as through detailed custom-designed floor plans and diagrams. We really did spend a long time on this too. We spent ages digging into the stories of parliament buildings all around the world, before narrowing it down to just the most interesting and beautiful buildings, writing tens of thousands of words to tell you their stories. We've also made both desk and wall calendars based on Assembly Required too, allowing you to experience these beautiful buildings year-round. Both are also double-sided, providing tons of bonus images for you to enjoy. If you're interested, you can click the link in the description to find out more. Plus, there's a whole load of bundles available if you want a good deal. Plus, if you do want a copy, then you can get 15% off anything Assembly Required by using the code ASSEMBLY. That code only lasts for this week, so if you're interested, now's your time. Anyway, this is just another way that you can help fund our journalism. So if you are interested, then your support will help us to continue investing in our journalism, as well as providing free content for years to come. So as always, thank you very much.